Good morning, my name is Stephen Capaldo. It is Thursday, May 1st, 2025. Thank you for joining us. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Canadian federal election that just took place 3 days ago on April 28th, 2025, today being Thursday, May 1st, 2025. And, it may not be a topic that interests that many people watching it, but it may be. I think I'm going to give my analysis of it anyway, and I think the conclusion that I come to is that as in the U.S. and most countries now, the ordinary people in Canada get screwed because they're kind of doomed for lack of knowledge, and they went into the voting booth. With certain ideas of what they were voting for, but they didn't really understand what they were voting for. And I think in the U.S. People saw this when they thought they were getting something very different from what they had before, and now they're getting just maybe a slightly nuanced version of what they had before. So anyway, I'll just to get us started, I'll just read a few verses from Matthew 24. Starting with verse 24, "For there shall arise false Christs and false prophets, and shall show great signs and wonders, insomuch that if it were possible they shall deceive the very elect. Behold, I've told you before. Wherefore, if they shall say unto you, Behold, he is in the desert, go not forth. Behold, he is in the secret chambers, believe it not. For as the lightning cometh out of the east, and shineth even unto the west, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. For wheresoever the carcass is, there will the eagles be gathered together." That's happening in a lot of places. "Immediately after the tribulation of those days shall the sun be darkened, and the moon shall not give her light, and the stars shall fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens shall be shaken. And then shall appear the sign, and the Son of Man in heaven, and then shall all the tribes of the earth mourn, and they shall see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And he shall send his angels with a great sound of a trumpet, and they shall gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. Now learn a parable of the fig tree. When his branch is yet tender, and putteth forth leaves, ye know that summer is nigh. So likewise ye, when ye shall see all these things, know that it is near, even at the doors." That we are in this generational shift, and a shift of the nature of earth. It's one way, and it's going to go to another way. "Verily I say unto you, this generation shall not pass till all these things be fulfilled. Heaven and earth shall pass away, but my words shall not pass away." So anyway, just to set the scene a little bit of certain things that are happening on earth, and I think you see them in a lot of the political events that are taking place. But I'll just go through a little bit what happened in this particular manifestation of the Canadian federal election that took place 3 days ago. I'll just explain a little bit about the Canadian political system. It's a parliamentary system, which means it's modeled after the British system, which means that you elect individuals who are from political parties, and the party that has the most seats, they form the government. It could be a majority government, it could be a minority government, and so that's how it is. You're not really just voting for an individual, you're voting for a government, kind of a power block, right? Which block is going to have power, and if one party has more than half, then they have a majority, and if they have less than half but they have the most, then it's up to them to see if they can form a minority government, or if there has to be another election. So that's a little bit about how it works, and I think one interesting thing about Canadian voting patterns is that if you look in the 20th century, now in the 21st century the parties have been more evenly split, although now the Liberal Party will take the lead. But in the 20th century, the Liberal Party of Canada was the government of Canada. They were elected to be government for 77 years in the 20th century. And the Soviet Party of the Communist Union, the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, rather, was the party of government for 75 years. So actually the Liberal Party of Canada was the government for more years of the 20th century than the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. That's interesting how that goes. What's democracy and what's not democracy. So the pattern is that people at the federal level, that people vote for the Liberal Party, and if the Liberal Party really screws up the economy or corruption, scandal, whatever, is that once in a while they'll throw in the Conservatives. The Liberals and Conservatives are the two main parties. There are a couple of other parties that are in there that can shake things up a little bit, but those are the two main parties. In this past election, it really came down to a contest between Liberals and Conservatives, which the Liberals won with a minority, but a healthy minority, almost a majority. And that's a little bit how the voting works. At the federal level, the historical trend is to vote for the Liberal Party, which becomes the government of Canada. But then in the provinces and territories, just as in the States you have states, in Canada you have provinces and territories, in those units, very often a different party is voted in as kind of an opposition. It's sort of like the concept in the U.S. government of checks and balances. You know, you have one party at the federal level, very often you have a different party at the provincial or territorial level. So anyway, that's a little bit, in general, the history of Canadian elections and voting, and just to show that there is definitely a strong inclination for people to vote for the Liberal Party of Canada to be the government of Canada. They end up with enough seats to be the government a lot. In the 21st century, the Conservatives had a run. The Liberals were in first, and then the Conservatives had a run, but now the last 10 years it's been Liberal, and it's going to be Liberal for as long as this new government lasts. So there's definitely a trend that way. Now, what happened? How is it when the polls were saying that the Liberals were going to get they were going to get really demolished because the former leader was just so unpopular and had done things that were very unpopular with people? Justin Trudeau, the son of Pierre Trudeau, was also a prime minister many years ago. How is it that that this happened? That somehow the Liberal Party was facing some kind of a monumental defeat, and they turned it into a pretty serious minority victory. You know, minority party. They didn't get a majority, only because in some of the larger centers of the country, the Conservatives made a run and they did a little bit better. So they blocked the possibility of the Liberals having a majority. But how did this happen? Well, there was one main cabinet minister, Chrystia Freeland, who was a Ukrainian Canadian of Ukrainian origin, and definitely a supporter of Ukraine and all of the war against Russia and all of this and that, definitely in that camp. She was finance minister, very influential, probably the leading minister of Justin Trudeau's government, and she decided, you know, we cannot win with this guy, so she resigned and started campaigning against Trudeau, and eventually she got enough people to say, yeah, we can't win this election with Trudeau. And Trudeau had won 3 elections. He won a majority and 2 minorities, and he didn't want to go out and, you know, be the one that caused this monumental defeat. I mean, what politician wants to go out like that? You know, you get you have some victories, but then you get basically slaughtered. So somehow a replacement had to be found. And the obvious choice was someone who was a close financial advisor to Trudeau, named Mark Carney, close financial advisor, who was governor of the Bank of Canada and governor of the Bank of England. And I think he's even a dual citizen of Ireland and Canada. I'm not sure what that is, but he's got more than one citizenship. And so he campaigned, and he became the head of the Liberal Party of Canada and Prime Minister of Canada because Trudeau resigned. So he was not elected, Carney, but he was, in becoming the head of the Liberal Party, he became the Prime Minister because the current Prime Minister, Trudeau, left. So what's his background? He's a banker. He's an internationalist, globalist, Rothschild type of banker. But, you know, he says that he says, you know, you may have heard some of the exchanges, if you follow this at all, that, you know, Canada will never be the 51st state, etc., etc., etc. And he says that he's going to put up a big fight to try to protect Canadians from the Trump tariffs and all of this. And I think people kind of bought into that. They were thinking, well, we vote Liberal anyway, as long as it's not Trudeau. If Trudeau is in, we know that the Conservatives are going to win with the leader of the time, Pierre Poilievre. But, you know, if we can get rid of Trudeau, we kind of have comfort going back to the way we usually vote, which is for the Liberals. We have this guy now who's talking tough against Trump, but really those two are birds of a feather. Two globalists, two New World Order guys. They're very much on the same page, but Canadians voted thinking that they're not on the same page, that the guy they elected is going to defend them. But I don't think so. I think basically it's going to be the ordinary people. They thought they were getting one thing and they got another, and the ordinary people, the everyday people, are going to end up getting screwed anyway. Because this is not, they're not, I mean, this is not bad news for Trump, who's, to have someone like Carney in there who's really got that same background of, internationalist, globalist, New World Order kind of guy. And people can deny it all they want, but the proof of the pudding is going to be in the eating. So anyway, how is it that with the unpopularity of the Liberals and Trudeau, all you have to do is get rid of Trudeau and bring in someone who pretends to be this great Canadian populist, but is really, an international banker? How is it simply by bringing in a different person who was aligned with Trudeau, financial advisor and a globalist and all the rest of it, that now the Liberals win? Well, it's, the people just had this comfort factor of voting Liberal at the federal level and different parties at the provincial and territorial levels. They had this comfort level that they could go back to the Liberal Party as long as it wasn't with Trudeau. With Trudeau they were going to get creamed, but with this guy they have a chance. So this leader of the Conservative Party, Pierre Poilievre, he was, when Trudeau was still around, he was leading the polls by 20 to 25 points. I mean, it looked like a foregone conclusion that he was going to become the next Prime Minister, the 25th Prime Minister, and in the 47th, I think, Parliament. So compare that with the U.S. numbers, and you can see Canada is a younger country. Right? So what happened with Poilievre? I think he had some things going against him. Like he's got a base, especially in Saskatchewan and Alberta. He's got a strong base of people who, don't like the high taxation, and they don't like feeling alienated from the federal government, and he's got a lot of support there. And in the Greater Toronto area he got more support, which prevented the Liberals from getting a majority. He got more support because people are just disaffected, and they're feeling the crunch from inflation and cost of housing, or it's just impossible to buy a house. All of these things that are happening, they're affecting consumers everywhere. So he did have a strong enough base that he was in a very strong position as long as Trudeau was around. Bring in someone else, and then all of a sudden, Poilievre is in not such a strong situation. Now, what would be the disadvantages? Why is it that all it took was changing Liberals, and then all of a sudden the Liberals can win again, and the Conservatives lose? Well, in the case of Poilievre, he was a member of Parliament for 20 years. So he's only in his mid-40s, so pretty much a career politician. He had not done a lot of things, and didn't have a lot of experience in other areas. Mark Carney, you can say what you want, but he has a strong financial background and a professional, technical background, and this is going to be very good for the globalists, not so good for Canadians, but you can still fool Canadians into thinking that Carney is the one who's going to fight for them. Poilievre didn't really have that. He had a strong base, especially in certain parts of the country, but he was a career politician. A lot of his talking points, he never campaigned on Canada being the 51st state or any of that stuff, but a lot of his talking points, if you put them up next to the MAGA talking points, you'd see a lot of similarities, like the border and drugs and taxes and crime and all this stuff. A lot of the talking points sounded like MAGA talking points. So he's a politician, and he's got a lot of these same talking points as Trump, and Trump just intervened with all this tariff stuff, and that just changed the whole nature of the election because it triggered a new Liberal leader, and it began to make Poilievre look like he was just kind of going to be a clone of Trump, which I think a lot of things have changed, and I think to say that he's just a clone of Trump, I think is maybe oversimplifying it, but definitely some of the talking points would remind you of things that Trump has been saying, although, Trump as well, if you look at what has happened in the U.S., people thought they were voting for one thing, and, they're not exactly getting that thing. They're getting something else, and something that seems to be not that different from things that they had before. So, so you had the that sort of personal aspect, career politician, and the MAGA talking points, and then just you just look at, there was just an alliance of people that did not want Poilievre to become prime minister. Quebec didn't want him. People were willing to vote for two other parties in Quebec, the Bloc Québécois, which is a federal party, but they only run candidates in Quebec because they're really in favor of the ultimate goal of sovereignty of Quebec. But people were willing to vote for them or the Liberals just to stop Poilievre in Quebec. So he didn't really have, there was no kind of breakthrough. And the only way the Conservatives ever could form a majority government for sure is if they had a significant breakthrough in Quebec. And did well enough in Ontario. Those are the two large centers. But Quebec decided they didn't want Poilievre. And you know, even though they were not maybe not big supporters of the Liberals or Trudeau in some cases, they could live with Carney, and they just they weren't going to open the door to Poilievre. And Carney and Trump, you know, obviously Carney was fighting against or running against Poilievre. He didn't want Poilievre. Trump really didn't want him. I mean, he's much happier with the guy like him, the international globalist, new world order, great reset kind of banker. He's much happier, Trump is, with a guy like Carney than with a guy like Poilievre, even though on the face of it, it would look like Poilievre is more populist the way Trump pretends to be populist. Right? So you have all these constituencies that don't want Poilievre, Quebec and Carney and Trump, and even in his own seat, you know, Poilievre ran in his own riding, his own seat, the district. In the Ottawa area, and he lost it. And, you know, he was elected there for 20 years, but this time he lost. The people just decided that under normal circumstances, and especially with Trudeau, he would have been an easy pick to be Prime Minister, Poilievre. But in the circumstances of Trump interfering in a very in a very radical way in the domestic politics and the economy of Canada, I think, you know, setting forth initiatives that were going to have a profound effect on Canada. That just changes the equation. That just divides everyone even more. The voting patterns in the federal election weren't that different than what they normally are, but what is striking is the fact that the Liberals could not just win a minority, but that they could even get back into the race because they were so far behind, because people were so angry. But people in the end decided they weren't that angry, so they weren't so angry that they wanted to someone who was a career politician that sounded like a Canadian version of MAGA. So I don't think really. I think that it's exaggerated to say that Poilievre was fighting for, you know, greater integration with the U.S., becoming the 51st state, etc., etc. I don't think at all that was part of his platform. But once you start opening that door, you know, and you're hearing things that sound like MAGA, and this guy who claims to be MAGA, he's introduced a bunch of tariffs, or he threatens to introduce tariffs that are going to do harm to your economy. It mobilizes, it galvanizes the people, and really galvanizes them to go back to their comfort zone. Now that they're rid of Trudeau, they can go back to their comfort zone, which basically in the 20th century was we elected the Liberals as the federal government for 77 years out of 100 years. The Soviet Communist Party was in office for 75 years only. You know, I'll leave you with that. And now the Liberals are starting to dominate in the 21st century. So that's a little bit of a look at what happened in that election, but it's kind of the same everywhere. You know, people in elections now, the everyday people are just getting screwed. And I think that this was kind of a, as I was reading in Matthew 24, you know, a false prophet or something. This is the thing, you know, pretending, you know, Carney pretending to be fighting for the people, fighting for the sovereignty of Canada, but who's he fighting for? He's fighting for the interests of the elite, of the global bankers. You know, he's part of that establishment. And this somehow, he was very clever at messaging that into, you know, he's got all of this professional experience and technical experience, and this other guy, he's just a populist hack. So he made that look really good to the people who are angry and hurting because of Trump, you know, Trump. And so in the end, I absolutely think that Trump got the one he wanted. He didn't want the so-called, populist sounding a bit like a Canadian MAGA guy. So anyway, that's what happened, and it's just another example, I think, of ordinary people get screwed, but they get screwed. They by people are doomed for lack of knowledge. That's what I think of in that election. That is that the people didn't really understand what was happening, what they were going to get if they voted this way. And I'm not saying that Poilievre would have solved all the problems. Not at all. I think that there's a report now. I think it's inside the Canadian Intelligence Services, maybe the RCMP, that says that Canada basically it just cannot run like a sustainable country anymore. That's in a way, and it's not necessarily absorption by the U.S., but that Canada cannot function as a country. It's not capable. So I don't know what's going to happen in the next few years, but it doesn't look very good for a lot of places, Canada being one of them. So anyway, I just wanted to give my analysis of it, and you can take it or leave it. I didn't really do sort of the usual type of message, but I thought that this was kind of an interesting event, and there are parallels of how different populations are getting screwed by this elite, the powers that shouldn't be. So I'll stop there, and thank you for listening, and I'll talk to you later. Bye for now.